Around 10:30 p.m. on April 17, 2025, just a few months ago, Australia's emergency hotline 000 suddenly received a call reporting a brazen home invasion and kidnapping at a residence on Greenacre Road, Bankstown. The trembling voice on the line belonged to a 15-year-old boy in a state of utter panic. He recounted how his mother had just been brutally attacked by a group of armed men and dragged away. Neighbors later confirmed they had heard screams echoing from the house in the dead of night. When local police arrived at the scene, the sight before them was heartbreaking. A 15-year-old teenager sat in shock. Beside him, his 8-year-old brother lying motionless with a serious head injury. The house was now in ruins with clear signs of a violent break-in. Immediately, the emergency team rushed both children to the hospital. The 8-year-old boy had suffered severe traumatic brain injury from being attacked with a baseball bat, underwent emergency surgery, and subsequently fell into a coma. As for the 45-year-old mother of the two children, there was still no news. Just over an hour later, around 11:30 p.m., a resident in the Beverly Hills area, about 5 miles from Bankstown, discovered a suspicious vehicle fire at the end of Welfare Avenue, a dead-end street bordering a park and highway. Fire crews were immediately dispatched and quickly contained the fierce blaze engulfing a black SUV. When the flames died down and the smoke cleared, the scene that emerged left everyone horrified. A body lying in the back seat of the vehicle. The scene was so gruesome that many firefighters later admitted they couldn't forget that terrifying sight. Police immediately cordoned off the area. Although they couldn't identify the victim with the naked eye, professional instinct suggested to investigators that the body in this SUV was very likely the woman kidnapped from Bankstown just an hour earlier. Facing the burned-out vehicle frame and the unidentifiable body inside, police realized they were dealing with a particularly serious murder case, a crime calculated and cruel down to every detail. That very night, police conducted a crime scene examination at the Bankstown house. Before them was a haunting picture of chaos. The front door smashed to pieces, glass shards scattered everywhere, and the living room floor covered in dark bloodstains, later confirmed to be from the 8-year-old boy's head wound. Signs of a fierce struggle were evident throughout the house. Overturned chairs, scattered belongings, all indicating the victim had been dragged away with extreme violence. Looking around the scene, investigators couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. They could hardly imagine the terror those children in this house had endured, witnessing their mother being dragged out and forced into a car right before their eyes. The brutality of this case far exceeded any ordinary crime. From the haunting account of the 15-year-old boy, police gradually pieced together the horrific picture of that night. About 4 to 5 strangers dressed in black, faces covered, carrying handguns and batons, suddenly stormed into the house. They beat his younger brother with a baseball bat while holding a gun to his head to control him, then immediately turned to attack the mother. Before the children's horrified eyes, the 45-year-old woman was beaten mercilessly. Not stopping there, they even tore the clothes from her body, an act so brutal it left the boy in shock. Finally, when the victim was nearly naked and unconscious, they dragged her outside, stuffed her into the back seat of a dark SUV waiting in front of the house, then sped off into the night, leaving ultimate terror for the children. These savage details made Bankstown police shudder, as they proved the criminal gang had planned meticulously, struck swiftly, and acted so ruthlessly they didn't hesitate to attack both women and children. Meanwhile, in Beverly Hills, the scene where the burned vehicle was found posed a terrible challenge for the forensic team. The SUV was reduced to a twisted metal frame, layers of plastic and paint melted into patches, turning the entire vehicle into a gruesome carbon tomb. Inside, the victim's body was so charred it was completely unrecognizable to the naked eye, as all traces on the face and body had been erased by the flames. Therefore, the crime scene technicians had to work under extreme tension, collecting evidence step by step with absolute caution. On the ground near the vehicle, they discovered remnants of scorched fabric, most likely the victim's clothing that had been removed before the perpetrator set the fire. Initial examination revealed another chilling detail. The victim may have been shot before the vehicle was set ablaze. Notably, where the fire occurred was at the end of a dead-end street, quite secluded, with only a few sparse houses behind it, next to a park with little foot traffic. A local resident admitted in shock that this neighborhood was normally peaceful and had never witnessed such a horrific scene. All this showed the perpetrator had calculated carefully, choosing a deserted location to dispose of the body while burning the vehicle to erase all traces of the crime. What police witnessed at both crime scenes quickly led to an initial assessment. This was not a spontaneous murder or ordinary robbery, but a cruel revenge plot, meticulously planned in advance. The fact that the victim was kidnapped from her home, stripped of all clothing, and finally burned in an SUV was not only meant to erase evidence, but also carried a message of horrifically destroying the woman's dignity. Faced with such a vicious, cold, and calculated crime, investigators understood they were dealing with extremely dangerous individuals. That very night, a special task force codenamed Strike Force Bushfield was established, gathering the most experienced investigators from the New South Wales Major Crime Squad and local police forces. A common determination was set to expose the mastermind behind this crime that had shocked the entire community. Although all clues pointed to the hypothesis that the victim was the woman just kidnapped in BANKSTOWN, police still persistently conducted forensic examinations and collected scientific evidence. Only when identity was absolutely confirmed could the task force take another solid step in the journey to hunt down the perpetrator. If the initial hypothesis was correct, then the victim at both crime scenes was Mrs. Tran Thi Kim, 45 years old, the unfortunate mother of the 8- and 15-year-old boys. Immediately, police proceeded to collect DNA samples from the two children, as well as fingerprints from personal items in the house to compare with the burned remains. However, because the victim's body had been almost completely destroyed by fire, DNA extraction became a major challenge. To clarify both the cause of death and identification work, police had to order an autopsy. While waiting for forensic results, the investigation team shifted focus to reconstructing the missing woman's background. Accounts from neighbors and friends showed Mrs. Kim was a Vietnamese woman who lived quite privately, gentle, never making enemies or conflicts with anyone. However, there was one particularly noteworthy detail. Her husband, Mr. Tung Nguyen, 45 years old, was not in Sydney when the tragedy occurred. According to relatives, Mr. Tung had flown to Queensland for work for a few days. When he heard the terrible news, he immediately booked the earliest flight back to Sydney in a distraught state, both to confirm his unfortunate wife's identity and to care for the two young children traumatized after this horrific incident. When delving deeper into the records, police encountered a major difficulty. Mrs. Tran Thi Kim had virtually no relatives in Australia. She had immigrated over 15 years ago, and her entire life in this foreign land revolved around her husband and two sons. No relatives, no close family, contacting to inform and gathering more information about the victims' relationships became extremely difficult, causing many dead ends in the initial investigation. Just when it seemed like a dead end, an important clue suddenly appeared from a neighbor's security camera. The footage clearly showed a group of people forcing a woman into a vehicle. Although the image was blurry and couldn't clearly identify faces, it was enough to corroborate the 15-year-old boy's statement. Two suspicious vehicles appeared at the scene, a white sedan and a black SUV. This was the key detail opening a new direction of investigation for the task force. This became the basis for police to expand the scope of investigation, focusing on the entire traffic camera system and civilian cameras along the nearly 5-mile route from Bankstown to Beverly Hills. A massive data network, from public cameras to residential cameras, was extracted and analyzed. Among them, blurry images at midnight recorded two vehicles, a white sedan and a black SUV, speeding on the highway, gradually revealing the perpetrator's travel route. Not stopping there, police also issued a public appeal. Anyone who witnessed anything suspicious on the night of April 17th should immediately contact them to assist the investigation. This appeal quickly proved effective. One witness confirmed hearing an engine revving near the victim's house around 10:30 p.m. Another said they saw a column of smoke rising in Beverly Hills around 11:30, exactly when the SUV was believed to have caught fire. Although no witness could identify the perpetrator's face, the testimonies combined with camera data helped police reconstruct a fairly detailed timeline. Around 10:30 p.m., the perpetrator group appeared in front of the victim's house in BANKSTOWN, broke in, and struck swiftly. Afterward, they quickly put the woman in the vehicle, moved toward Beverly Hills. Around 11:30 at a deserted dead-end street, they murdered the victim, then set fire to the SUV before escaping the scene just minutes before the smoke column was discovered by residents. Notably, from security camera footage, police noted a white sedan appeared on Canterbury Road at 10:45, traveling in the same direction as a black SUV a few hundred feet behind. The coincidence in time, location, and direction of movement made the likelihood these two vehicles were in the same convoy almost certain, thereby reinforcing the hypothesis of an organized criminal plan, not a lone action. When approaching the Beverly Hills area, a private security camera captured both vehicles, the white sedan and black SUV, turning onto Welfare Avenue. However, just about 15 minutes later, another camera showed the sedan rushing back out alone, while the SUV had completely disappeared. From here, police concluded the perpetrator group had taken the victim to the secluded area, murdered her, set fire to the SUV, then all got into the sedan to escape, leaving the burned vehicle with the body inside. Afterward, images from the traffic system showed the sedan had disappeared on the southbound highway. Likely it had driven straight to Melbourne that night. However, tracking the trail was not simple, as this sedan had used fake license plates, causing major obstacles to the investigation. Right at that time, the victim's husband had also returned to Sydney. In the first meeting with police, he appeared clearly devastated and in extreme pain. When taken to the identification room, he tearfully confirmed the body was his wife, thanks to a few remaining personal characteristics, along with a scorched gold necklace found near the body. However, the real climax occurred when police pressed with questions. Who could have a motive to harm your family? After a moment of hesitation, the man suddenly revealed a horrifying secret. He had been involved in an illegal drug ring. According to his statement, recently he frequently traveled between Sydney and Melbourne doing business with a Vietnamese criminal group in a large-scale methamphetamine production and distribution network. However, during these trips, serious conflicts arose. A shipment worth millions of dollars suddenly disappeared without a trace. The other criminal group suspected he was the embezzler, or at least directly involved in the loss. Therefore, they may have chosen the path of brutal revenge. Immediately, investigators realized a new hypothesis was forming. The case was not simply a random crime, but very likely stemmed from grudges in the drug trade world, where suspicion and settling scores are often resolved through violence. And painfully, the person who had to bear the direct consequences was the innocent woman. On April 22, 2025, the final forensic examination results officially confirmed the husband's statement. DNA samples taken from the body's teeth completely matched the DNA of the two children, Mrs. Tran's biological children. Thus, after many days of effort, police reached a definite conclusion. The victim burned in the SUV was indeed Mrs. Kim Tran, 45 years old. This information was widely announced, closing the journey of identifying the unfortunate woman, opening a new phase of the case. Parallel to the identification process, crime scene examination and trace collection work was also urgently deployed. At the victim's house, the forensic team carefully searched every corner, hoping to find any remaining signs of the perpetrator, from fingerprints, shoe prints, to fabric fibers, or the smallest evidence. But unfortunately, the attacking group proved extremely professional. They wore gloves, covered their faces, and operated in darkness, leaving virtually no useful identifying traces. However, among the messy scene, investigators still discovered a piece of black duct tape dropped near the entrance. Its shape and location suggested a high possibility this was an item used to bind or gag the victim during control, then accidentally dropped when they retreated. Immediately, the piece of tape was sealed and sent to the forensic laboratory to search for DNA, sweat, or epithelial cells of the perpetrator. Meanwhile, at the scene where the SUV burned, forensic experts were patiently collecting every small fragment, hoping to find any detail that could reveal traces of the perpetrator. The first thing that caught their attention was the metal license plate had been completely removed. However, the vehicle identification number stamped on the engine couldn't be destroyed. After being cleaned and illuminated under special light, that number sequence was still readable. Quick verification in the vehicle registration system showed this SUV was registered in Victoria, but the owner on paper was a ghost company that didn't actually exist. This reinforced the assessment that the vehicle was one used by criminals, possibly purchased or rented through a chain of anonymous transactions to conceal true identity. Additionally, bullet casings recovered in the vehicle cabin were also sent for ballistic analysis. After comparing barrel rifling and metal structure, specialists concluded this was a .22 caliber handgun. Another line of investigation was opened, focusing on phone communication data. During the interrogation of Mr. Tung Nguyen, police noted a chilling clue. Right before Mrs. Kim Tran was murdered, his phone had received a series of extortion messages with countdown content by time intervals. 20 minutes left, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Those cold messages were no different from a death clock, foretelling the horrific moment about to happen to the unfortunate wife. However, at that time, Mr. Tung was in Queensland, and his device was out of coverage area. Therefore, those messages were only delivered after the tragedy had occurred. Police believe the husband's lack of response, albeit unintentional, may have angered the kidnapping group, making them believe he deliberately ignored their demands, thus acting more brutally with the hostage. Nevertheless, the message chain showed the criminals initially had no intention of killing immediately, but wanted to negotiate for ransom money. They very likely put forward a huge amount, forcing Mr. Tung to pay within a certain time frame. But when the ultimatum was ignored, they switched from extortion to revenge, carrying out the threat in the most brutal way possible. When piecing the data chain together, from the planned kidnapping behavior, moving with 2 different vehicles, to the clearly scripted communication method, the emerging picture became increasingly clear. This was an organized criminal gang, experienced with assigned roles and an interstate network. Therefore, New South Wales Police quickly coordinated with Victoria Police to expand the investigation scope, especially focusing on the methamphetamine production and trafficking ring that the victim's husband had reported being involved with. As expected, Victoria Police confirmed they were also monitoring a Vietnamese gang suspected of running a large-scale methamphetamine production facility. This information immediately made both sides agree to open a joint campaign. And just 2 days after the case, on April 19, 2025, Victoria Police raided a remote farm in the Springvale area west of Ballarat, believed to be this group's methamphetamine production headquarters, and there they seized many chemicals and production equipment, consolidating evidence of the criminal network. However, this raid didn't catch any suspects because apparently the criminal group had gotten wind and successfully dispersed before police arrived. Nevertheless, this discovery confirmed the criminal group behind this ring had cross-state operations and was very sophisticated. At this point, the investigation focus returned to the list of the victim's husband's relationships in the drug ring. Based on his statement, police filtered out names the husband had met and done business with recently. And from this list emerged a 29-year-old Vietnamese man living in Bankstown named Nguyen The An, a close associate of the victim's husband. Intelligence showed Nguyen The An had a role as a bridge between the Victoria drug group and some distribution contacts in Sydney. That is, he was an important link in the supply chain, and especially this name had appeared in police files about interstate methamphetamine trafficking activities, yet had no clear criminal record. The fact that someone like The An lived right in the Bankstown area where the kidnapping occurred made all suspicion immediately focus on him. Not only that, the close relationship between him and the victim's husband further reinforced the possibility this was a deliberate internal settling of scores. The biggest question raised was, could it be that Nguyen The An himself had exploited the acquaintance and familiar territory to organize the kidnapping and murder of his colleague's family? Investigators began secretly monitoring The An. Administrative records showed he rented an ordinary apartment in Bankstown, single, with no clear occupation. In the weeks after the case, The An remained in Sydney instead of fleeing, lived discreetly, seemingly lying low as if unrelated to the commotion outside. Police had quietly collected Nguyen's phone data from call history, messages to phone location on the night of April 17th, and results showed on the night the incident occurred, Nguyen's phone had appeared in the Bankstown area and turned off around 10 p.m., then a few hours later turned back on at a different location. This was a suspicious sign because it coincided with when the kidnapping took place. Raising suspicion, he deliberately turned off his phone to avoid being tracked when committing the crime. Additionally, financial situation analysis showed right after the night of April 17th, Nguyen had received a large sum into his bank account, then quickly withdrew it as cash. This could be payment or expenses for organizing this hit. And based on this increasingly solid evidence, New South Wales police decided to act. At 5 a.m. on August 28, 2025, more than 4 months after the case, the Special Task Force, together with the Major Crime Squad, raided the An's apartment in Bankstown. Nguyen was arrested on the spot while still sleeping, so he was completely surprised and couldn't resist. Police also quickly seized his phone, computer, and some documents to serve the investigation. At Bankstown Police Station, Nguyen the An was interrogated intensely. However, as expected of a hardened criminal, he exercised his right to remain silent and refused to admit anything. Nevertheless, police had sufficient grounds to proceed with charges. On the afternoon of August 28, 2025, they officially charged the Anash with crimes including murder and intentional grievous bodily harm related to the attack on the 8-year-old boy. Police announced to the press that the An was the one who orchestrated the kidnapping and murder of Mrs. Kim Tran, although he didn't directly fire the gun. Despite having arrested an important suspect, the investigation journey hadn't stopped there. New South Wales police believe the Ange didn't act alone, but rather hired 3 hitmen to jointly carry out the kidnapping and murder of the victim. The 3 who directly fired the gun are still at large. Police said they will continue hunting these individuals to the end. They also coordinated with federal forces to trace the criminal organization behind everything. The case has thus entered a new phase, from investigating an individual murder case to an expanded investigation of a mafia ring and criminal network running throughout Australia. At this point, a question was raised. Who is Nguyen the An, and did he really do this to the mother and 2 children because he wanted to punish his colleague? According to investigation, the An, 29 years old, has Australian citizenship of Vietnamese origin. He was born and raised in the Vietnamese community in Sydney. For a long time, he had not been a stranger in the underground underworld, as he was considered an important link in a drug trafficking organization based in Victoria. Although only 29 years old, the Aneg had early ventured into interstate drug trafficking and emerged as a young, ambitious boss. He was trusted and assigned to transport goods between Melbourne and Sydney, while also resolving conflicts arising in the illegal business process. Before being arrested, Nguyen had never been convicted of serious criminal offenses, making him somewhat invisible to the law, despite being actively involved in the underworld. Regarding personal life, few knew much about the An. Beyond the outer shell of a single freelance businessman, he rented an apartment in Bankstown just a few blocks from the victim's house but was frequently absent. The relationship between Nguyen the An and the victim was mainly through Mrs. Kim Tran's husband. He was said to be a very close business associate of the victim's husband. Perhaps thanks to that close relationship, when the gang's goods went missing, he immediately suspected his associate had betrayed or been careless. He received orders from superiors, or decided himself to strike as a warning by attacking this person's family for revenge and to send a deterrent message. Therefore, the An's motive for the crime was believed to be to resolve disputes while also creating pressure forcing the husband to return the missing drugs. And thus, the An's actions showed a cruelty and chillingly calculated nature. He didn't directly act but pulled strings from behind, hiring others to carry out the dirtiest parts of this plan. That cold indifference had outraged public opinion no less than the direct act of taking a life. Psychologically, one can imagine the Ang as an educated type of criminal. He clearly understood both underground rules and legal risks, so he tried to conceal his role. Instead of acting himself, he hired mercenaries and created alibis. He also brazenly stayed local after committing the crime as a way to challenge authorities, or confident his plan was too perfect. However, in the end, the law reached him, dragging him into the light to pay for the crimes he himself had committed. After being arrested, the An was quickly brought to court, appearing at Bankstown Local Court on August 29th. At this hearing, he did not apply for bail. This was understandable because given the particularly serious nature of the case, the possibility of getting bail was virtually zero. The preliminary hearing judge also denied bail and transferred the on to remand status awaiting trial. Outside court, the defense attorney declared on behalf of the defendant that this was only the early stage of the legal process and her client would plead not guilty to the charges, meaning the on planned to deny all charges in the upcoming official trial. Currently, the direct accomplices have not been arrested, so Nguyen the on will be the only defendant in upcoming court sessions. This could make the case more complex because he could blame those strangers to minimize his role. However, with the evidence collected, legal experts assess such a strategy would be difficult to convince a jury. According to the record, he is being prosecuted for first-degree murder of Mrs. Kim Tran, along with intentional grievous bodily harm of the 8-year-old boy. And if convicted, he could face life imprisonment without parole. And as of now, the official trial hearing for the case is still ahead. Nguyen. The An continues to be detained awaiting trial with an attitude described by his lawyer as ready to prove his innocence, though public opinion sees it as merely evasion of guilt. What about you? Do you believe this person is innocent as he claims? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.